that almighty day, O Lord, almighty day, O Lord, when Joshua faced the battle, and the walls came tumbling down.
We're Daryl and Jocelyn Cooley. We have a family of 5, 2 boys and a girl. Our girl is Ariel, she's 7. We got Isaiah, who's 3, and then we got little Joshua, who's 20 months. And we reside in Raleigh, North Carolina.
Well, with this pregnancy, things were going well financially. We were doing good. This was the child that we were able to buy everything for. I was working, he was working, so we felt like we were going to have this would be a great pregnancy, and having Joshua would be great. There were no problems with the pregnancy. When Joshua was born, everything was okay. But by the 3rd day of life, after having him, he was born normal. Joshua started getting sick. We really didn't know what was going on with him. The doctors were ruling out infection. First he started not eating, and then he started going back into the warmer. So I was like, Daryl, something is wrong. And next thing we knew, he was in the neonatal intensive care unit. The doctors came in and basically told us that our son was slipping into a coma. He had started having seizures, but at this point, no one really knew why. So the doctors kept doing a lot of tests on Joshua. Finally, they came in and said, you know, it looks like if it's not infection, after doing spinal taps, running a series of tests on it, it looks like it might be something metabolic. If it is something metabolic, and we were at that time, we were not sure what all of that meant. It's just that they said if it's something metabolic, we're looking at a lot of problems. And sure enough, they came back, they test ammonia level. Ammonia level in the body, they were testing, it's a particular test. And they told us that it came back and it was 958. Normal was 30 to 50. So it didn't look good, and they told us, you know, he's gonna have to be transferred from Rex Hospital to the University of North Carolina. So they couldn't send the helicopter, because normally with an ammonia level that high, they would fly out to get Joshua. There was nowhere to land the helicopter, so they had to take him in the ambulance. And so by the time Joshua arrived at UNC, it's estimated that his ammonia level was 1,500. So basically, they told us he probably wouldn't make it.
So I had to leave her at the hospital and basically wait in the waiting room, and the hospital was actually empty. It seemed like I was the only one out there, and it was probably like 12 a.m. in the morning when he first got there. So then the metabolic doctor came out, and she basically explained his disorder is a metabolic disorder. Is called urea cycle disorder. But his particular disorder, I mean, that's like the generic or general name, but his particular disorder is OTC, or Ornithine Transcarbamylase deficiency, which basically means there was an enzyme missing in his liver. And the way the urea cycle works is when we eat protein, anything with protein is broken down into byproducts. One of those byproducts is ammonia, and ammonia is broken down further into urea, and then when we urinate, we get rid of the urea. But his liver was missing that critical enzyme that breaks it down, the ammonia down to urea. So it stopped at the ammonia level and just build up in his system to toxic levels, and that's what sent him into a coma. And she said the other thing is he had the worst, that's the worst kind that you could, that they treat, and they had only treated, she said, in the last 20 years, they had only treated 2 kids. Now the strange thing during that time, it was another kid that had been admitted maybe a couple of weeks prior to Joshua that had the same disorder. His name was Elijah, another African American male kid, and there's no correlation as far as race, but it was just strange that they had 2 of these kids with such a rare disorder, because they said 1 in 100,000 kids worldwide get this disorder, and over in Europe, when they get it, they just let them die. So that's the thing they kept telling us. That's how serious it is. It's something they don't really look forward to treating because it's so hard to treat. So, you know, they told us basically how bad it was, what we were looking at, and the last thing she said is that, you know, we can do all we can to help them, but we can't promise you that we're going to save them. And, you know, the thing that, when she said that, I thought about Joshua's name and what it meant. And I told her that his name is Joshua Michel Cooley. And Joshua means that the Lord saves. So I told her that, you know, if anybody saved him, it would be the Lord. And, you know, doctors don't like to acknowledge God, but, you know, she said, well, we know there's a higher being that's looking out. But, you know, we knew at that point, you know, I knew who my trust was in. You know, I knew who we had to depend on. It wasn't the doctors. It wasn't all their medications, all their technology. You know, from then on, I know, you know, this is, you know, the Lord is going to bring us through this.
We started praying. We started praying. We started fasting. A lot of times the doctors, you know, and they were looking at us like, well, you know, wanting us to have closure. Asking us to bring in, you know, have we consulted with the chaplains? But we knew God for ourselves, and we just started praying. We started laying hands on Joshua, and a lot of times the nurses were concerned about me because I wasn't eating. They didn't know I was fasting. They were a lot of times a sign of depression is the person doesn't eat. So while they thought I was depressed, we were fasting. And what Joshua remained in a coma for about 2 weeks. And we had a group of friends around Joshua. We were holding hands, and that's when he opened his eyes in the midst of prayer. But when he opened his eyes, the doctor said, oh, those are reflexes. He's not really there. Those are reflexes. And we were trying to decide if they were voluntary reflexes or involuntary reflexes. Joshua started to move his arm. They said, oh, those are reflexes. That's really not him. So at one point they brought us into a meeting, and Dara asked the question, well, give us an example of voluntary and involuntary reflexes. And they said, well, if he cries. So Dara said, so if he cries, that means that he's doing that. And they said, yes. Sure enough, after we came out that meeting, Joshua, although he had a tube in his mouth and you couldn't hear him, you could see he was crying. And the nurse looked at us and said, he's crying. I don't care what anybody says. Also, my friend, who's a nurse, was sending me information. She started researching this disorder, and the disorder gave us ammunition to keep fighting. We had the same information the doctors had. And we just kept fighting. We just kept believing in God, and we just kept praying. Our church was praying. We had so many people praying for Joshua. It was almost like a prayer chain. And we know that that's why Joshua came through.
And the doctors were always talking about death. That's all they talked about, him dying. And then one time, you know, we was in a meeting, 8 or 9 doctors and nurses and medical staff. They're talking about death, and Jocelyn just got tired, and she said, what about talking about him living? It's time to talk about him living.